Hello, my lovely children. I missed you so much. It's time for chapter 5 of The Hobbit. It's evening time right now as I record this. I don't know when you'll watch it, so it might not be evening time, but I've got my blanket and I've got my porg. Her name is Cinnamon. And do you guys want to see a painting I did? I've been working on Kylo Ren. Do you like it? Do you think it's cool? I think it's cool. I'm doing some Star Wars paintings. Okay, you ready? Chapter 4, Riddles in the Dark. This is a really good chapter, guys. I hope you're ready. Hope you're cozy, comfortable. Chapter 4, Riddles in the Dark. When Bilbo opened his eyes, he wondered if he had, for it was just as dark as with them shut. No one was anywhere near him. Just imagine his fright. He could hear nothing, see nothing, and he could feel nothing except the stone of the floor. Very slowly he got up and groped about on all fours till he touched the wall of the tunnel, but neither up nor down could he find anything. Nothing at all. No signs of goblins, no signs of dwarves. His head was swimming, and he was far from certain even of the direction they had been going when he had his fall. He guessed as well as he could and crawled for a long way, till suddenly his hand met what felt like a tiny ring of cold metal lying on the floor of the tunnel. It was a turning point in his career, but he did not know it. He put the ring in his pocket almost without thinking. Certainly it did not seem of any particular use at that moment. Now, if you guys know anything about Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, you know this is a big moment. It's a big moment. He found a ring. It's an important ring. Okay, no spoilers. No spoilers. He did not go much further, but sat down on the cold, hard floor and gave himself up to complete miserableness for a long while. He thought of himself frying bacon and eggs in his own kitchen at home, for he could feel inside that it was high time for some meal or some other, but that only made him more miserable. He could not think what to do, nor could he think of what had happened, or why he had been left behind, or why the goblins had not caught him, or even why his head was so sore. We know why his head was so sore. He bonked it on the ground. He was knocked unconscious. That would leave your head sore for sure. The truth was, he had been lying quiet, out of sight and out of mind, in a very dark corner for a long while. After some time, he felt for his pipe. It was not broken, and that was something. Then he felt for his pouch, and there was some tobacco in it, and that was something more. Then he felt for matches and could not find any at all, and that shattered his hopes completely. Just as well for him, as he agreed when he came to his senses. Goodness knows what the striking of matches and the smell of tobacco would have brought out of the dark holes of the terrible place. Now, still, at that moment, he felt very crushed. But in slapping all his pockets and feeling all round himself for matches, his hand came on the hilt of his little sword, the little dagger that he had gotten from the trolls, and that he had quite forgotten. Not fortunately had the goblins noticed it, as he wore it inside his breeches. Now he drew it out. It shone pale and dim before his eyes. So it is an elvish blade too, he thought, and goblins are not very near, and yet not far enough. Remember, elvish blades glow blue when there's orcs or goblins around. But somehow he was comforted. It was rather splendid to be wearing a blade made in Gondolin for the Goblin Wars, and also he had noticed that such weapons made a great impression on the goblins that came upon them suddenly. Go back, he thought, no good at all. Go sideways? Impossible. Go forward? Only thing to do. On we go. So up he got and trotted along with his little sword held in front of him and one hand feeling on the wall, and his heart all of a pitter-patter. Now certainly Bilbo was in what we call a tight place, but you must remember it was not quite so tight as it would have been for me or you. Hobbits are not like ordinary people, and after all, if their holes are nice and cheery places and properly aired, quite different from the tunnels of goblins, still, they are more used to tunneling than we are, and they do not easily lose their sense of direction underground. Not when their heads have recovered from being bumped. Also, they can move very quietly and hide easily and recover wonderfully from falls and bruises, and they have a fund of wisdom and wise sayings that men have mostly never heard or have forgotten long ago. Still, I should not have liked to have been in Mr. Baggins' place all the same. The tunnel seemed to have no end. All he knew is that it was going down pretty steadily and keeping in the same direction in spite of a twist and turn or two. Suddenly, without any warning, he splashed into water. Ugh, it was icy cold. That pulled him up sharp and short. He did not know whether it was just a pool in the path, or the edge of an underground stream, or the brink of a dark subterranean lake. The sword was hardly shining at all. He stopped, and he could hear, when he listened hard, drops, drip, drip, dripping from an unseen roof into the water below, but there seemed no other sort of sound. So it is a pool or a lake, and not an underground river, he thought. Still, he did not dare wade out into the darkness. He could not swim, and he thought too of nasty, sliming things with big, bulging blind eyes wriggling in the water. Could you imagine being deep underground in a mountain, and pitch black, can't see anything, and there's an underground lake? Ooh, what would be living in that lake? Ugh. Something creepy for sure. Lost my place. Even in the tunnels and caves the goblins had made for themselves, there are other things living, unbeknownst to them, that have sneaked in from outside to lie up in the dark. Some of these caves, too, go back in their beginnings to ages before the goblins, who only widened them and joined them up with passages. Deep down here by the dark water lived Gollum, a small, slimy creature. I don't know where he came from, nor who or what he was. He was Gollum, as dark as darkness, except for two big, round, pale eyes in his thin face. He had a little boat, and he rowed about quite quietly on the lake. For a lake it was, wide and deep and deadly cold. He paddled it with large feet dangling over the side, but never a ripple did he make, not he. He was looking out of his pale, lamp-like eyes for blind fish, which he grabbed with long fingers as quick as lightning. He liked meat, too. Goblin he thought good when he could get it, but he took care they never found him out. He just throttled them from behind if they ever came down alone, anywhere near the edge of the water, while he was prowling about. They very seldom did, for they had a feeling that something most unpleasant was lurking down there, down to the very roots of the mountain. They had come on the lake when they were tunneling long ago, and they found they could go no further. Actually, Gollum lived on a slimy island of rock in the middle of the lake. He was watching Bilbo now from a distance with pale eyes like telescopes. Bilbo could not see him, but he was wondering a lot about Bilbo, for he could see that he was not a goblin at all. Gollum got into his boat and shot off from the island, while Bilbo was sitting on the brink, altogether flummoxed and at the end of his wits. Suddenly, up came Gollum and whispered and hissed, "Bless us and splash us, my precious. I guess it's a choice feast, at least a tasty morsel it'd make us, Gollum." And when he said Gollum, he made a horrible swallowing noise in his throat. Gollum. Gollum. That is how he got his name, though he always called himself my precious. The Hobbit jumped nearly out of his skin when the hiss came to his ears, and he suddenly saw the pale eyes sticking out at him. "Who are you?" he said, thrusting a dagger in front of him. "What is he, my precious?" whispered Gollum, who always spoke to himself, because he never had anyone else to talk to. This is what he had come to find out, for he was not really hungry at the moment, only curious. Otherwise he would have grabbed first and whispered after. "I am Mr. Bilbo Baggins. I have lost the dwarves, and I have lost the wizard, and I don't know where I am, and I don't want to know, if only I can get away." "What's he got in his hands?" said Gollum, looking at the sword, which he did not quite like. "A sword, a blade which came out of Gondolin." Said Gollum, and he became quite polite. "Perhaps we sits here and chats a bitsy, my precious. It likes riddles, perhaps, does it?" He was anxious to appear friendly at the moment, until he found out more about the sword and the Hobbit. "Very well," said Bilbo, who was anxious to agree until he found out more about the creature. "You asked first," he said, because he had not had time to think of a riddle. So Gollum hissed, "What has roots as nobody sees, is taller than trees, up it goes, and yet never grows?" "Easy," said Bilbo. "Mountains, I suppose." "Does it guess easy? It must have a competition with us, my precious. My precious asks, and if it doesn't answer, we eats it." "My precious. If it asks us and we doesn't answer, then we does what it wants, eh? We shows it the way out, yes?" "All right," said Bilbo, not daring to disagree, and nearly bursting his brain to think of riddles that could save him from being eaten. 30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still." That was all he could think of to ask. The idea of eating was rather on his mind. It was an old one, too, and Gollum knew the answer as well as you do. "Teeth, teeth, my precious, teeth. The answer is teeth, but we only has 6. Then he asked his second. "Voiceless it cries, Wingless it flutters, toothless bites, mouthless mutters. Half a moment, cried Bilbo, who was still thinking uncomfortably about eating. Fortunately, he had once heard something like this before, and getting his wits back, he remembered the answer. Wind! Wind, of course. Then he thought, and said, an eye in a blue face saw an eye in a green face. That eye is like to this eye, said the first eye, but in low place, not in high place, said Gollum. He had been underground a long time and was forgetting this sort of things. Gollum brought up memories of ages and ages before, when he lived with his grandmother in a hole in a bank by a river. My precious, he said. Sun on the daisies, it means, it does. But these ordinary above-ground, everyday sort of riddles were tiring for him. Also, they reminded him of days when he had been less lonely and sneaky and nasty, and that put him out of his temper. What is more, they made him hungry, so this time he tried something a bit more difficult. It cannot be seen, it cannot be felt, cannot be heard, cannot be smelt. It lies behind the stars and under the hills, and empty holes it fills. It comes first and follows after, ends life and kills laughter. Unfortunately for Gollum, Bilbo had heard this sort of thing before, and the answer was already all around him. Dark, he said without even scratching his head. Darkness. A box without hinges, key, or lid, yet golden treasure inside is hid, he asked to gain time, until he could think of a really hard one. After a while, Gollum became... Oh, sorry, I missed a line. But it proved a nasty poser for Gollum. He hissed to himself, and still he did not know the answer. After some while, Bilbo became impatient. Well, what is it? He said. The answer's not a kettle boiling over, which is what you sound like. Give us a chance. Give us a chance, my precious. Well, said Bilbo after giving him a long chance, what about your guess? And suddenly Gollum remembered thieving from nests long ago. Eggses, he hissed. Eggses. Then he asked, alive without breath, as cold as death, never thirsty, ever drinking, all in mail, never clinking. He also, in his turn, thought this was a dreadfully easy one, because he was always thinking of the answer, but he could not remember anything better at the moment. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out the best way to prop up the iPad, you know. He could not remember anything better at the moment. He was so flustered by the egg question. All the same, it was a poser for poor Bilbo, who had never had anything to do with water if he could help it. I imagine you know the answer, of course, or you can guess it as easy as winking, since you are already sitting comfortably at home. Bilbo cleared his throat once or twice, but no answer came. After a while, Gollum began to hiss with pleasure to himself. Is it nice, my precious? Is it juicy? Is it scrumptiously crunchable? He began to peer at Bilbo out of the darkness. Half a moment, said Bilbo, shivering. I gave you a good long chance just now. It must make haste, haste, said Gollum, beginning to climb out of his boat on the shore to get to Bilbo. But when he put his long webby foot in the water, a fish jumped out in fright and fell on Bilbo's toes. Ugh, it is cold and clammy. And so he guessed. Fish, fish, he cried. And that was the answer. Gollum was dreadfully disappointed, but Bilbo asked another riddle as quick as he could, so that Gollum had to get back in his boat and think. No legs lay on one leg, 2 legs sat near on 3 legs, 4 legs got some. I'm terrible at riddles, you guys. Like, I never would have guessed any of these. Gollum would have eaten me, okay? It would have happened. It was not really the right time for this riddle, but Bilbo was in a hurry. Gollum might have had some trouble guessing it if he had asked it another time. As it was, talking of fish, no legs was not so very difficult. Fish on the table, man at table sitting on a stool, and the cat has bones. That, of course, is the answer, and Gollum soon gave it. This is what he said next. This thing all things devours, birds, beasts, trees, flowers, gnaws iron, bites steel, grinds hard stones to meal, slays kings, ruins towns, and beats high mountains down. Poor Bilbo sat in the dark thinking of all the horrible names of all the giants and ogres he had ever heard of, but not one of them had done all these things. He had a feeling that the answer was quite different and that he ought to know it, but he could not think of it. He began to get frightened, and that is bad for thinking. Gollum began to get out of his boat. He flapped into the water and paddled to the bank. Bilbo could see his eyes coming towards him. Ugh, his eyes are glowing, so creepy. His tongue seemed to stick in his mouth. He wanted to shout out, "Give me more time! Give me more time!" But all that came out was a little squeak, "Time! Time!" Bilbo was saved by pure luck, because, of course, time was the answer. Gollum was disappointed once more, and now he was getting angry, and also tired of the game. It had made him very hungry indeed. This time he did not go back into the boat. He sat down in the dark by Bilbo. That made the hobbit very uncomfortable. "It's got to ask us a question, my precious. Yes, yes, just one more question to guess. Yes," said Gollum. But Bilbo simply could not think of any question that was with that nasty cold thing sitting next to him. Ask us, said Gollum. Bilbo punched himself and slapped himself. He gripped on his little sword. He even felt in his pocket with his other hand. Then he found the ring he had picked up in the passage and forgotten about. "What have I got in my pocket?" he said aloud. He was talking to himself, but Gollum thought it was a riddle, and he was frightfully upset. Not fair, he hissed. "It isn't fair, my precious, it is, to ask us what it's got in its nasty little pocketses." Bilbo, seeing what had happened, and having nothing better to ask, stuck to his question. "What have I got in my pocket?" hissed Gollum. "It must give us 3 guesses, my precious, 3 guesses." "Very well, guess away," said Bilbo. "Handses," said Gollum. "Wrong," said Bilbo, who had luckily just taken his hand out again. "Guess again." said Gollum, more upset than ever. He thought of all things he kept in his own pockets. Fish bones, goblin teeth, wet shells. Don't we all? A bit of bat wing, a sharp stone to sharpen his fangs on. Oh, and other nasty things. He tried to think what other people kept in their pockets. "A knife," he said at last. "Wrong," said Bilbo. "Last guess." Now, Gollum was in much worse state than Bilbo was before. He hissed and spluttered and rocked himself back and forth. "Come on," said Bilbo, "I'm waiting." "Time's up," he said. "String or nothing," shrieked Gollum, which was not quite fair, working in 2 guesses at once. "Both wrong," said Bilbo, very relieved. He jumped at once to his feet and put his back to the nearest wall and held out his little sword. He knew, of course, that the riddle game was sacred and of immense antiquity, and even wicked creatures were afraid to cheat when they played at it. But he felt he could not trust this slimy thing to keep any promise in a pinch. But at any rate, Gollum did not at once attack him. He could see the sword in Bilbo's hand. He sat still, shivering and whispering. At last Bilbo could wait no longer. "Well," he said, "what about your promise? I want to go. You must show me the way." "Did we say so, precious? Show the nasty little Bagginses the way out. Yes, yes. But what has it got in its pockets, eh? Not string, precious, but not nothing. Oh, no, Gollum!" "Never you mind," said Bilbo. "A promise is a promise." "Cross it is, impatient, precious," hissed Gollum. "But it must wait. Yes, it must wait. We can't go up the tunnel so hasty. We must go and get some things first. Yes, things to help us." "Well, hurry up," said Bilbo. Not far away was his island, of which Bilbo knew nothing. And there in his hiding place he kept a few wretched odds and ends, and one very beautiful thing. One very beautiful, very wonderful thing. He had a ring, a golden ring, a precious ring. "My birthday present," he whispered to himself, as he had done in the endless dark days. "That's what we wants now. We wants it." He wanted it because it was a ring of power. And if you slipped that ring on your finger, you were invisible. Only in sunlight could you be seen, and then only by your shadow, which would be shaky and faint. "My birthday present. It came to me on my birthday, my precious." So he had always said to himself. But who knows how Gollum came by that present, ages ago in the old days when such rings were still at large in the world. Perhaps even the master who ruled them all could not have said. Gollum used to wear it at first, till it tired him. Then he kept it in a pouch next to his skin, till it galled him. Now usually he hid it in a hole in the rock on his island, and was always going back to look at it. He still had a bone or two left. "Quite safe, yes," he whispered to himself. "It won't see us, will it, my precious? No, it won't see us, and its nasty little sword will be useless." That is what was in his wicked little mind as he slipped suddenly from Bilbo's side, and flapped back to his boat, and went off into the dark. Bilbo thought he had heard the last of him. Still, he waited a while, for he had no idea how to find his way out alone. Suddenly, he heard a screech. It sent shivers down his spine. Gollum was cursing and wailing in the gloom, not very far off by the sound of it. He was on his island, scrabbling here and there, searching and seeking in vain. "Where is it? Where is it?" Bilbo heard him crying. Lost is it, my precious? Lost, lost. Curse us and crush us, my precious. It's lost. What's the matter? Bilbo called. What have you lost? It mustn't ask us, shrieked Gollum. Not its business, no, Gollum. It's lost. Gollum, Gollum, Gollum. Well, so am I, cried Bilbo, and I want to get unlost, and I won the game, and you promised. So come along, come and let me get out, and then go on with your looking. Utterly miserable as Gollum sounded, Bilbo could not find much pity in his heart, and he had a feeling that anything Gollum wanted so much could hardly be good. Come along, he shouted. No, not yet, precious, Gollum answered. We must search for it. It's lost. But you never guessed my last question, and you promised. Never guessed, said Gollum. Then, suddenly out of the gloom came a sharp hiss. What has it got in its pocketses? Tell us that. It must tell us first. Do you think he thinks that Bilbo has the ring? I think he thinks that Bilbo has the ring. As far as Bilbo knew, there was no particular reason why he shouldn't tell. Gollum's mind had jumped to a guess quicker than his naturally, for Gollum had brooded for ages on this one ring and was always afraid of losing it. Answers were to be guessed, not given, Bilbo said. But it wasn't a fair question, said Gollum, not a riddle. Oh, well, if it's a matter of ordinary questions, Bilbo said, then I ask one first. What have you lost? Tell me that. What has it got in its pocketses? The sound came hissing louder and sharper. But as he looked toward it, to his alarm, Bilbo now saw the two eyes of light peering at him. As suspicion grew in Gollum's mind, the light of his eyes burned brighter. What have you lost? Bilbo persisted. Bilbo could not guess what had maddened the little creature, but he saw that all was up and that Gollum meant to murder him. Just in time, he turned and ran blindly back up the dark passage down which he had come, keeping close to the wall, feeling it with his left hand. What has it got in its pocketses? He heard the hiss loud behind him, and the splash as Gollum leapt from his boat. What have I wonder, he said to himself as he panted and stumbled along. He put his left hand in his pocket. The ring felt very cold as he quietly slipped it onto his groping finger. The hiss was close behind him. He turned now and saw Gollum's eyes like small green lamps coming up the slope. Terrified, he tried to run faster, but suddenly he struck his toes on a snag on the floor and fell flat with his little sword under him. In a moment, Gollum was on him, but before Bilbo could do anything, Gollum passed by, taking no notice of him, cursing and whispering as he ran. What could it mean? Gollum could see in the dark. Bilbo could see the light of his pale, shining eyes, even from behind. Painfully, he got up and sheathed his sword, which was now glowing faintly again. And then, very cautiously, he followed. Obviously, Bilbo's invisible right now, because he has the ring on. Oh. Curse it, curse it, curse it, hissed Gollum. Curse the Baggins, it's gone. What has it got in its pocketses? Oh, we guess, my precious, he's found it. Yes, he must have. My birthday present. Bilbo pricked up his ears. He was at last beginning to guess himself. He hurried a little, getting as close as he dared behind Gollum, who was still going quickly, not looking back, but turning his head from side to side as Bilbo could see from the faint glimmer on the walls. My birthday present, curse it! How did we lose it, my precious? Yes, that's it. When we came this way last, when we twisted that nasty young squeaker, that's it. Curse it! It slipped from us from all those ages and ages. It's gone. Suddenly, Gollum sat down and began to cry, a whistling and gurgling sound horrible to listen to. Bilbo halted and flattened himself against the tunnel wall. After a while, Gollum stopped weeping and began to talk. He seemed to be having an argument with himself. It's no good going back there to search. No, we doesn't remember all the places we visited, and it's no use. The Bagginses has got it in its pocketses. The nasty noser has found it, as we says. We guesses, my precious, only guesses. We can't know till we find the nasty creature and squeezes it. But it doesn't know what the present can do, does it? It'll just keep it in its pocketses. It doesn't know, and it can't go far. It's lost itself, and it's a nasty, nosy thing. It doesn't know the way out. It said so. It said so, yes, but it's tricksy. It doesn't say what it means. It won't say what it's got in its pocketses. It knows. It knows a way in, and it must know a way out. It's off to the back door, That's it. The Goblinses will catch it then. It can't get out that way, precious. Gollum. Goblinses. Yes, but if it's got the present, our precious present, then Goblinses will get it, Gollum. They'll find it. They'll find out what it does. We shan't ever be safe again. Never, Gollum. One of the Goblinses will put it on, and then no one will see him. He'll be there, but not seen. Not even our clever eyes will notice him. And he'll come creepsy and tricksy and catch us, Gollum, Gollum. Then let's stop talking, precious, and make haste. If the Baggins has gone that way, we must go quick and see. Go, not far now, make haste. Gollum crazy. He just talking to himself. With a spring, Gollum got up and started shambling off at a great pace. Bilbo ran after him cautiously. His head was a whirl of hope and wonder. It seemed the ring he had was a magic ring. It made you invisible. He had heard of such things, of course, in old tales, but it was hard to believe he had really found one, by accident. Still, there it was. Gollum with his bright eyes had passed by him only a yard to one side. On they went, Gollum flip-flapping ahead, hissing and cursing, Bilbo behind going as softly as a hobbit can. Soon they came to places where, as Bilbo had noticed on the way down, side passages opened, this way and that. Gollum began to count them. 1 left, yes, 1 right, yes, 2 right, yes, yes, 2 left, yes, yes, and so on. As the count grew, he slowed down, and he began to get shaky and weepy, for he was leaving the water further and further behind, and he was getting afraid. Goblins might be about, and he had lost his ring. At last, he stopped by a low opening on their left as they went up. 7 right, yes, 6 left, yes. This is it, this is it. This is the way to the back door. Here's the passage. But we daren't go in, precious. No, we doesn't. Goblinses down there, lots of goblinses. We smell them. Hiss. What shall we do? Curse them and crush them? We must sit here and wait. Wait a bit and see. So they came to a stop. Gollum had brought Bilbo to the way out after all, but Bilbo could not get in. Gollum was sitting right in the opening. Bilbo crept away from the wall more quietly than a mouse. But Gollum stiffened at once and sniffed, and his eyes went green. He hissed softly but menacingly. He could not see the Hobbit, but now he was on alert, and he had other senses, hearing and smell. He seemed to be crouched right down with his flat hands splayed on the floor and his head thrust out, his nose almost to the stone. There was only a black shadow in the gleam of his eyes. Bilbo could see or feel that he was tense as a bowstring. Now, so Bilbo looked over and thought about jumping over it. All these thoughts flashed by in a second. He trembled, and then quite suddenly in another flash, as it lifted by a new strength and resolve, he leaped. No great leap for a man, but a leap in the dark. Straight over Gollum's head he jumped, 7 feet forward and 3 feet in the air, indeed, had he known it. He only just missed cracking his skull on the low arch of the passageway. Gollum threw himself backwards and grabbed as the Hobbit flew over him, but too late. His hands snapped on thin air, and Bilbo, falling fair on his sturdy feet, sped off down the new tunnel. He could hear Gollum screaming behind him, "Thief, thief, Baggins, we hateses it, we hateses it, we hateses it forever." Then there was a silence, but that too seemed menacing. If goblins are so near that he smelt them, he thought, then they'll have heard his shrieking and cursing. Careful now, or this way will lead you to worse things. Bilbo blinked, and then suddenly he saw the goblins in full armor with drawn swords, sitting just inside the door and watching it with wide eyes, watching the passage that went into it. They saw him sooner than he saw them. Yep, they saw him. Whether it was an accident or a last trick of the ring before it took a new master, it was not on his finger. With yells of delight, the goblins rushed upon him. A pang of fear and loss smote Bilbo, and forgetting even to draw his sword, he stuck his hands into his pockets, and there was the ring still in his left pocket, and he slipped it on his finger. The goblins stopped short. They could not see a sign of him. He had vanished. They yelled twice as loud as before, but not so delightedly. "Where is it?" they cried. "Go back up the passage," some shouted. "This way! This way!" "Look out for the door," bellowed the captain. Whistles blew, armors clashed, sword rattles, goblins cursed and swore and ran, falling over one another and getting very angry. There was a terrible outcry to do and disturbance. Bilbo was dreadfully frightened, but he had the sense to understand what had happened and to sneak behind a big barrel. "I must get to the door, I must get to the door," he kept saying to himself, but it was a long time before he tried. The door was still ajar, but a goblin had pushed it nearly closed. Bilbo struggled, but he could not move it. He tried to squeeze through the crack. He squeezed, and he got stuck. It was awful. His buttons got wedged on the edge of the door and the doorpost. He could see out into the open air. There were a few steps running down into a narrow valley between tall mountains. The sun came out from behind a cloud and shone brightly on the outside of the door, but he could not get through. Suddenly, one of the goblins inside shouted, "There's a shadow by the door. Something is outside." Bilbo's heart jumped into his mouth. He gave a terrific squirm. Buttons burst off in all directions. He was through, with a torn coat and a torn waistcoat, leaping down the steps like a goat, while bewildered goblins were still picking up his nice brass buttons on the doorstep. Of course, they soon came down after him, hooting and howling, and hunting among the trees. But they don't like the sun. It makes their legs wobble and their heads giddy. They could not find Bilbo with the ring on, slipping in and out of the shadows of the trees, running quick and quiet, and keeping out of the sun. So soon they went back grumbling and cursing to the guard door. Bilbo had escaped. And that's the end of chapter 5. I'll be posting chapter 6 in a few days. I love you. I miss you. Goodbye from me and Cinnamon. My cat would say goodbye, but she's asleep. She's off somewhere under the couch or something. Okay, I love you. Bye.